Smart telescopes like this brand new Dwarf 3 are designed to make observing and photographing the sun, the moon or deep sky objects like distant galaxies and nebulae in space easy, fun and hassle-free. Just set up the device, connect to that device wirelessly using your smartphone or tablet and start enjoying images while the Dwarf 3 smart telescope does all the hard work for you. And that for less than $500. Is it really that easy? Let's find out in this review.
The Dwarf 3 Smart Telescope is available for $499. For that price, you'll get the Dwarf 3 telescope itself, magnetic solar glasses for solar imaging, a USB charging cable, a cleaning cloth and a handy travel bag. However, it doesn't come with a tripod. Don't worry though, as the Dwarf 3 will fit on any camera tripod with a standard 1¼ inch 20 screw size. You'll find a link to the Dwarf 3 Smart Telescope in the video description below. In terms of the optics, the Dwarf 3 features a 3.4mm aperture wide field and a 35mm aperture telezoom lens. The tele lens includes extra low dispersion glass to reduce diffraction spikes and avoid chromatic aberrations, which should result in clear and detailed space images.
You're watching Guido's Astro4 on my Astrophotography channel, so of course we're going to attempt to do some solar, lunar and deep sky astrophotography using the Dwarf 3 Smart Telescope. But Dwarflab also markets the Dwarf 3 as great for nature and wildlife photography. So that's why I'm out here on the outskirts of my city in Utrecht, the Netherlands, to attempt to do some nature and wildlife photography as well.
On this windy day, I came across some swans, a stork and a heron enjoying the ryegrass in the farmer's field, something we see a lot here in the Netherlands. I quickly set up my Dwarf 3 telescope and connected to it through my smartphone. In order to control the Dwarf 3 Smart Telescope, you first need to download the Dwarflab app onto your smartphone or tablet and connect to its Wi-Fi signal after switching on the telescope. The Wi-Fi password was dwarf_12345678. I was using version 3.0.0 build 213 of the app, and the Dwarf 3 was running on firmware version 1.1.2. I'm mentioning this because both the app and the firmware get updated regularly. Once connected to the Dwarf 3 via Wi-Fi, I clicked on Photo in the app, which brought up this control panel. Using the joystick feature on the bottom left and the speed dial on the right, I was able to maneuver the telescope. I used a wide field lens view to align one of the swans in the frame of the telephoto view. With a simple click on the top left view, I switched to the telephoto lens. This easy switch between lenses is, in my opinion, one of the best features of the Dwarf 3. Next, I used the autofocus option on the lower right to focus on the swan and snap the photo by tapping on the large photo button. Here's that image that was saved as a JPEG file. Then I selected the burst mode at the top right, which lets you take multiple shots at once. I set it to capture 5 pictures with no intervals, and here's how that turned out. While the burst feature isn't as fast as some digital cameras, it managed to capture all 5 images. As the swan moved, I attempted to track it manually using the joystick feature while selecting the Object Tracking option found under Functions on the lower right. By selecting Object Track and by drawing a rectangle around the swan, the Dwarf 3 automatically started to track it effectively until the swan moved out of the field of view and into a ditch. I switched back to the wide field lens, moved over to a heron, switched back to the telephoto view, centered the heron in that view, used autofocus to focus on the heron, used Object Track to track the heron, and activated the burst mode again. This resulted in these 5 JPEG images. I also spotted a stork in the field, pointed the Dwarf 3 at it, and captured these 5 pictures after using autofocus in the burst mode. Be aware that under the Functions menu, you can also manually adjust camera settings like shutter, gain, which is similar to ISO on a regular camera, white balance, brightness, contrast, and hue. By default, these settings are set to auto, but you can tweak them to your preference. I did notice the occasional lag in the Wi-Fi connection, and to maintain control, I had to stay within 5 meters of the device. On a windy day like this, a sturdy tripod is a must to prevent vibrations, especially in telephoto mode. Also, be aware that the Dwarf 3 doesn't record any sound, only photo and video. All in all, the Dwarf 3 was incredibly fun to use during the day. I returned to the Swan and used Object Track again to shoot a 4K video, which was saved in MP4 format on the Dwarf 3. Here's a snippet of that footage and some other photos and videos I captured that afternoon.
I just gotta say, I love the design of the Dwarf 3 Smart Telescope because it reminds me of that old Pathfinder robot NASA sent to Mars, and from that one scene in The Martian. Did you see it? Are you receiving me?
Are you receiving me? Yes. No.
Pointing the camera.
Yes!
After that dubious performance, I went home to capture the sun from my rooftop. I put a magnetic solar filter in front of the Dwarf 3 and leveled the tripod. I had to battle the strong winds on my rooftop, but using the joystick-like controls in the app, I managed to center the sun in the field of view of the telephoto lens. Autofocus worked really well and immediately revealed some sunspots, which was really cool to see. I selected Solar Track under Functions in the app, and it reminded me to level the tripod, place the magnetic solar filter over the lenses, and center the sun in the telephoto view. As I already did everything, I clicked Done, and the Dwarf 3 started tracking the sun automatically. Here's a quick first image I captured using the photo option to check out the focusing. Next, I switched to video mode and recorded a 1-minute video clip of the sun. Here's a snippet of that video, and as you can see, the winds were pretty strong that day. Then I moved to Astrophotography mode for a more advanced approach to capture the sun. I explored the new Virtual Sky Atlas, which gave me a real-time view of the sky at my location. I selected the sun and clicked the photo icon. There was a moment of confusion when the app asked me to stop tracking the sun, but after clicking OK, tracking was immediately resumed in Astro mode, and I could continue. Under Settings, I could select the number of photos in FITS format, decide whether to live stack them, and choose to apply binning or not. If the shutter speed is less than 1, photos are automatically captured in 4K without binning, which is the case when capturing the sun. I hit record leaving everything at default, and the Dwarf 3 started capturing the sun while the app showed me a live stack, which was really amazing to watch. Fortunately, after about 80 images, clouds moved in and I had to cancel the session. Let me show you the automatically stacked image the Dwarf 3 produced. I also downloaded the 80 individual FITS files and used some advanced processing tools like AutoStacker and Registax. This was the final result after stacking and sharpening the pictures using those software tools. Honestly, I was impressed. The larger aperture of the Dwarf 3 definitely gave me better detail compared to the old Dwarf 2. Overall, I ended up with a great solar image despite the challenging weather conditions.
Alright folks, I think we had enough daytime photography for an astrophotography channel. So let me put my Dwarf 3 telescope up the rooftop again and let's do some real lunar and deep sky astrophotography.
When I got up the roof, I was greeted by a beautiful sunset, so I fired up the Dwarf 3 to test the time-lapse feature using the wide field lens. Do you like the result of this video? I do. You'll notice plenty of planes in the sky as I live fairly close to Schiphol, the largest international airport in the Netherlands. Then, unexpectedly, I heard the sound of a helicopter much closer to my rooftop. It turns out the military was conducting VFR flight drills with their helicopters as part of Operation Falcon Leap. Excited by the sight, I decided to use the object track mode on the Dwarf 3 in an attempt to track the combat helicopter in action. Here's what I managed to capture. I captured the sound of the helicopter on my smartphone while I was recording the Dwarflab app. After the excitement of tracking the combat helicopter was over, I pointed the Dwarf 3 at the moon. During my first attempts to center the moon in the telephoto view, I noticed that the green rectangle in the wide field view, meant to align with the telephoto view, was slightly off. But after I found and autofocused on the moon in the telephoto view, the Dwarf 3 automatically calibrated the alignment of the green rectangle in the wide field view to match the telephoto view. Since it was twilight, the Dwarf 3's autofocus left the moon a bit overexposed. I enabled the track moon mode, which can be found in the bottom right under function, and the Dwarf 3 immediately began tracking the moon, making it very easy to photograph or record. To get a good view of the surface of the moon, I manually adjusted the shutter speed to 1320, reduced the gain to 50, and tweaked the white balance. This gave me a beautiful silver-grey moon with a blue twilight background. I decided to take some JPEG photos using burst mode to check the focus. Here's an example of a single JPEG image I captured. After that, I switched to Astro mode, which offers a more advanced moon photography experience. In Astro mode, I used the virtual sky atlas located under function in the bottom right to find and tap on the moon. This feature provides precise information about the moon's position, and by tapping on the small photo icon, the Dwarf 3 will automatically slew to and begin tracking the moon. So I clicked the photo icon, and at this point, the app asked me to stop tracking the moon in order to reinitiate tracking. This was a bit confusing, so I'll be reporting this minor issue to Dwarflab. Once I clicked OK, I was able to start tracking the moon again. In Astro mode, I fine-tuned the focus using both autofocus and making manual adjustments using the plus and minus buttons to get the moon as sharp as possible. After I was happy with the focus, I selected 250 photos in FITS format with stacking, 4K and AI Enhanced selected, and I hit the record button. Just like in solo mode, the Dwarf 3 began capturing and stacking the images live. After a few stacks, I already saw that the stacked picture of the moon was a lot smoother as compared to an individual image. I did notice that the live stacking was slower than the actual image capturing, at least when I was using my smartphone. After capturing the 250 photos, I decided to end the session and the telescope switched back to the live view. This is the final automatically stacked picture of the moon without any edits from me, and it already looks quite stunning. After I stacked and sharpened the FITS files myself, I came up with this final image. It's definitely a big step up from what I could achieve with the Dwarf 2. I also confirmed with Dwarflab that the updated app will be available for the Dwarf 2 as well. This wrapped up my first moon photography session with the Dwarf 3. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions. As night fell, I prepared for some deep sky astrophotography. I was eager to try out the new EQ mode on the Dwarf 3. With EQ mode, you can precisely photo align the telescope to either the north or south celestial pole. This alignment helps to track the stars and other celestial objects with great accuracy, allowing for longer exposure photos that capture the faint light from distant objects. I aimed the Dwarf 3 towards Polaris in the north and used a 2-second shutter speed in the app to check if the stars were in focus. Once focused, I activated the EQ mode, but things didn't go as expected. After initiating the procedure, the app told me to rotate the Dwarf 3 almost 180 degrees toward the south, something I've never seen in other polar alignment procedures. After trying to troubleshoot for a while with no success, I decided to give up on EQ mode for the time being. Instead, I tilted the telescope toward Polaris and used the telephoto lens to confirm that Polaris was visible in the telephoto view, which equals a rough polar alignment. I do want to remind you that I'm testing an early production version of the Dwarf 3, and Dwarflab is very eager to improve the overall experience. With Polaris in sight, I pressed the calibration button, allowing the Dwarf 3 to pinpoint its exact location in the sky. Once the automatic calibration was complete, I returned to the Virtual Sky Atlas in Astro mode located under the function menu. I selected the Andromeda Galaxy, the farthest object for this imaging session at around 2.5 million light-years away. With a simple tap, the telescope smoothly slew to Andromeda and centered it perfectly in the field of view. I set the shutter to 30 seconds since I was roughly aligned with the north celestial pole. To capture the light of the galaxy, I used the internal Astro filter, which extends into the near-infrared range. I set the gain to 50 and configured the telescope to take 300 FITS images of the Andromeda Galaxy in the Settings menu. As soon as I hit record, the app reminded me that I hadn't captured any dark frames. These frames help reduce noise in your photos and should ideally be taken with a lens cap on and should match the shutter speed and temperature of your exposures. But in my eagerness to photograph the galaxy, I skipped that step. Fortunately, the Dwarf 3's new Sony IMX678 sensor with Starvis 2 technology generates much less noise than older CMOS camera sensors, so I decided to take my chances. The Dwarf 3 started capturing 30-second images and live stacking them in real time, which was really cool to see. Some of the stars appeared a bit elongated in the first frames, but I stuck with the 30-second exposures. Longer exposure pictures help to bring out the faint details of the galaxy, which is especially helpful in a light-polluted area and with a half-moon in the sky. After about 2.5 hours, I had captured 300 frames. Here's a live stack that was automatically generated by the Dwarf. It already looks pretty good. I also stacked and edited the FITS files myself, and this is the final image I ended up with. Not bad at all for a smart telescope under $500. I moved on to photograph the North America Nebula, a stunning emission nebula in the constellation Cygnus. The Virtual Sky Atlas worked flawlessly again. Just a quick selection of the nebula, tap the photo icon, and the Dwarf 3 slew to the target and centered it perfectly in the telephoto lens. I left the shutter at 30 seconds and began capturing. After 160 frames, which equals 1 hour and 20 minutes of total exposure time, I ended the session. Here's the automatically generated stacked image from the Dwarf 3. And here's the photo I processed myself using PixInsight. I was honestly impressed by how well the North American nebula and the Cygnus walls showed up after just 1 hour and a half of total exposure time. Next, I aim for M45, the Pleiades, a bright cluster of blue gas giant stars that's visible to the naked eye. I captured 150 frames at 30 seconds each using the Astrofilter. Here's the Dwarf 3's stacked version. And here's mine after some additional processing to pull out the dusty nebulae surrounding the stars. I may have gone a little overboard, but it was amazing to reveal this detail with just 1 hour and 20 minutes of data. It was getting late, and I noticed how humid it had gotten outside. Interestingly, the Dwarf 3's lenses stayed fog-free, which was a nice surprise. While scanning the sky, I saw Jupiter rising. I aimed the telescope at the planet, but since planets appear quite small through the Dwarf 3, all I could see was a bright dot and 4 smaller ones, Jupiter's Galilean moons. If you observe Jupiter night after night, you'll see those moons shift positions, which would make for a cool time-lapse. Just as I was about to call it a night, Orion started rising in the early morning sky. I couldn't resist. I kept the same setting and the Astrofilter, capturing 120 frames before the dawn forced me to stop. This gave me only 1 hour of exposure time, but here's the unedited stack from the Dwarf 3. And here's my version after some processing of the Orion Nebula. Overall, it was a fantastic night. I captured images of 4 deep sky objects and even got a look at Jupiter. The Dwarf 3 flawlessly located and centered each target without any issues, performing impressively despite the minor hiccup with the EQ mode. Before giving you my final verdict, here are some extra features of the Dwarf 3 I do want to highlight. First, the STA mode under connection settings in the app allows you to connect the telescope to your home Wi-Fi network, letting you control and monitor the Dwarf 3 comfortably from inside your house. The 10,000 mAh battery easily lasted throughout the night and can be recharged if needed while the Dwarf 3 is powered on and in use. As for storage, the 128GB internal memory card gave me more than enough space for all the photos and videos I showed you in this review. In terms of the competition, the only smart telescope in the same price range is the C-Star S50 from ZWO. I'll wait for the final production version of the Dwarf 3 before making a detailed comparison, so stay tuned for more. Alternatively, if you already own a digital camera, you could invest in a high-quality astrophotography lens like the Samyang 135mm f2. However, you'd also need a star tracker like the Skywatcher 2i Pro to track the stars, which adds significant cost. Definitely more than the $40 tripod I used for this review. Compared to its predecessor, the Dwarf 2, I tested 1 year ago, the Dwarf 3 offers better optics, an improved camera sensor, and the app experience has improved a lot. Dwarflab did not pay me for this review. Thanks to Jimmy from Dwarflab for sending me this early production unit to test out.
Thanks a lot, Jimmy.
But all the opinions here are completely my own. Would I recommend the Dwarf 3? Absolutely. For around $500, it's a fantastic value, especially for those wanting to capture night sky photos without spending thousands of dollars. While it has a few minor issues like a limited Wi-Fi range when you're not connected to your home Wi-Fi network and a slow burst mode, the pros far outweigh the cons. But what are your thoughts on the Dwarf 3 Smart Telescope? I'd love to hear them. Feel free to drop any questions in the comment section. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit like, subscribe and consider joining the channel to support future content. And as always, I do want to wish you clear skies.